Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zacchaeus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to that spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down at once. I must stay in your home today." So Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this household, because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one came to seek and save the lost." Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
We're the Cordrays. I'm Dennis Cordray, and this is my wife, Frankie. We have 2 children, a son and a daughter, and 3 grandchildren.
And our families grew up in the South Houston area. Dennis and I went to Pasadena High School, where we graduated together.
And after high school, I went to the University of Houston and graduated in 1954. Frankie and I had been married 58 years, working on 59. While living in South Houston, I got involved in politics. I ran and won 2 terms on the city councilman, as a city councilman, and I was elected and served 4 terms as mayor.
While living in South Houston, Dennis and I belonged to Faith United Methodist Church and loved the church, but it relocated. And in 1994, we joined this church, First United Methodist Church of Pasadena. We love this church, especially our Sunday school class, which is called the Friendship Class.
If you just joined the church or you're visiting, we would love to have you in our Sunday school class. We love this church. We love our class. And there's lots of love for everybody. Thank you for listening to our short story. We appreciate it very much. Amen.
Thank you.
My name is Brenda Myers, and I have not ever known not being in this church. My mom was 18, my dad was 20 when they became members here, and I was about 6 months old, so that's how long I've been there. You do the math. The church has always been a part of me. I grew up as a child here. I love the old church, had lots of nooks and crannies because they had built onto it. I remember kind of crawling through the halls and hallways and all the secret passages, we used to call it, sliding down banisters, all that good stuff when you were a kid. It was a safe place. It was a happy place. I was married in this church. My daughter Adrian, I have one daughter Adrian, her husband Dave. I have 2 grandchildren, Parker and Ava. Adrian was married here as well, so it has been a central focus for us. I think in my life there have been a lot of tragedies surrounding me and mine. Very close friends. I lost 2 best friends to cancer, breast cancer. One was in her 30s and one was in her 50s. They were both church friends I got to know here, and in the midst of their tragedy, we became close. I think as a child, I saw teenagers that I wanted to emulate. I think as an adult, I saw parents that I wanted to be like. I think as a young parent, and I saw older adults that I wanted to grow into their likeness. And I think that's what a family of faith does. The personal examples you have of people living through tragedy, living through joys, living through sorrows, all of that gives you more or less a blueprint for living, and that's what the church has done for me. I'm active in ministry, in the prayer ministry. I teach an adult Sunday school class and teach some Bible studies from here and there, and that just gives me room to grow and to be part of growing in Him and help mentor some people along the way. It's very important for me to be in the church, and I want everyone to know that there's a place for them here, just not any better place. Thank you for letting me share.
As I said, we've started this series, People We Can Learn From, and the point of the series is that God does show up in unexpected people. And so the first week we read from the Gospel of Luke, and we read the story of the persistent widow. Remember the widow who went to the judge because she had an issue she needed to resolve, and she went to the judge and asked for the judge to hear her case, and the judge said, nope, go home. And so she went home, and she came back the next day, and then she came back the next day, and finally, after coming back several days and pleading her case, the judge finally relented and said, okay, I'll give you what you want. And the reminder to us is that sometimes God calls us to be persistent as well when we are seeking God's justice with others, with people in our community, and all of that. And then last week we talked about the Pharisee and the tax collector. And you may remember the Pharisee came in and was praying so everybody could hear him. And he saw the tax collector over there praying in a very penitent way. And he said, oh, Lord, I am so glad I'm not like that tax collector over there. And the reminder to us was that sometimes we as God's people, we compare and contrast one another. We compare and contrast ourselves with each other. And the reality is that what God wants us to do is, instead of comparing and contrasting ourselves with others, to be honest with ourselves and with God about who we are and who we are called to be. So today our story is a story about a man named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was a little man who climbed up in a tree. And what I want to share with you today is that, as a message, is that people who climb trees will be seen. Think about that. People who climb trees will be seen. Now, Jimmy, listen closely, because there's more to that than just about climbing trees. But people who climb trees will be seen. And I don't know about you, any of you climb a tree when you were a kid? You may still be climbing trees today. Yeah. Climbing trees is a lot of fun, isn't it? It's great fun, and I did it as a child. And some of you know that I grew up in Lake Jackson, and the first house that I lived in as a child was on Carnation Street. I still remember the address, 219 Carnation. We were 2 houses from the corner of Carnation and Sycamore Street. Now that's an interesting street name given the passage that we read today, but there was a big old oak tree in the side yard. At least I thought it was big. And it seemed to reach up to the sky. And so one of the things that I enjoyed doing is I enjoyed climbing up in that oak tree, because I was curious about what the world looked like from that vantage point. And when I got up in the top of the tree, I could see the top of the house. I could see the house across the street. I could see down Sycamore Street and all the houses up and down Sycamore Street. I could even see over the street, over the houses across the street, to the school that I went to for elementary school, Boydell Elementary. And so it was a wonderful experience, and part of going up in the tree was not only the thrill of climbing, but also it was the thrill and the curiosity of seeing things that I could not see when my feet were planted on the ground. I was a curious kid. In fact, there were other things that I did to try to deal with my curiosity. For instance, there were a couple things that I did that maybe were not the wisest thing to do, but I did them because I was curious. For instance, what happens when you pass your hand through an open flame? You get burned, right? Or what happens when my brother and I, we dug a hole in the backyard, and we were of that age, and we thought that if you dug far enough, you might reach the other side of the earth. Well, we discovered that you don't do that. Or what happens if you plant a sunflower seed? How long will it take for that sunflower seed to grow into a sunflower? Well, too long for an 8-year-old to wait, let me tell you that. And then there was the chicken thing. We've got some Easter chickens. Some of you are too young to remember this, but there was a time when before Easter, they would sell little baby chickens, and they would come in colors. I mean, not just yellow, but purple and pink and blue and all. I see some of you remember that. You're old enough. You must be as old as I am. Okay. But anyway, so the question was that I was curious about is, Mom and Dad, if we let these chickens grow up to be real big chickens, will they lay eggs in the backyard? Well, what we discovered is they won't lay eggs if your father accidentally steps on one and kills it. So, those are some of the things that I was curious about, and perhaps there were some things in your life that you were curious about too, that stories that you can share in your story swap in the next couple of weeks. But I was also, as I grew older, I also became curious about some other things. I became curious about the meaning and purpose of life, and who I was, and who created this world, and if there was a God, could I be in a relationship with God, and who was this man named Jesus, and what was the relationship between the two, and so I was curious about all those things. And I began to realize that God was working on me. God was working on me. Perhaps God's working on you as well. And perhaps you too were someone who had some curiosities growing up about all kinds of things, but now as a young adult or an adult, you're at a place where you're beginning to have these other kinds of questions, questions about the meaning and purpose of life. Questions about who God is and how God relates to the world. Questions about what is your particular purpose as a part of this creation, this universe. Well, Zacchaeus was someone who also had some of those same curiosities, some of those same questions. And as the story goes, Zacchaeus heard that Jesus, a man named Jesus, was coming to town one day, and it says that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town, and so Zacchaeus saw that the crowd was gathering up and down the street, and Zacchaeus ran to go find a place where he could see Jesus coming through town as well. But Zacchaeus was a little guy. Zacchaeus was short in stature, and as he stood there trying to see, he could not see because of the crowd. And so what did Zacchaeus do? He climbed up in a sycamore tree. And the reality is, Zacchaeus, being an adult, he actually kind of humiliated himself, because you see, Zacchaeus was also a tax collector. And not just a tax collector, Zacchaeus was the tax collector. Zacchaeus was the head tax collector of all the tax collectors in Jericho. And you may remember that in that day, the Roman government employed people to be tax collectors. And Zacchaeus was the leader of all of those who were employed to be tax collectors. And their job, as we talked about last week, their job was to collect a certain amount of tax from every person in the region. And so the way that the tax collector got paid was to collect a little bit more than was owed. And so tax collectors were not someone that everybody wanted to have some time with. They were people that were hated. And so Zacchaeus kind of puts himself on the spot. He climbs up in this tree, waiting for Jesus to come down the road. And as he climbs up in the tree, and Jesus comes down the way, Jesus looks up in the tree and says to him, "Zacchaeus, come down. Zacchaeus, come down. Come down. I want to stay in your home today. And verse 6 says, so Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. And then it says, everyone grumbled because Jesus was going to be in the home of a sinner. Everyone was grumbling. And Zacchaeus responds, and at first I'd like to share with you how Zacchaeus responds from the New Revised Standard of the version of the Bible. I have it up here. Because if you read different versions of the Scriptures, you realize that this particular verse, verse 8, is translated differently by different translators. I want to share with you the New Revised Standard version of this. Zacchaeus, it says here, Zacchaeus stood there. This is after Jesus has invited him down out of the tree. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay him back 4 times as much. So here, what it seems like is that here we have Zacchaeus, who is a sinner, who recognizes that he's done wrong, and he, when Jesus invites him down out of the tree, he changes his ways and says, in the future, Jesus, I will give half of my goods to the poor. And I will, anyone I've cheated, I will repay 4 times. Well, there's another way, another version of this story as well. And that is the version that we read today and that you'll find there in the Grow, Pray, and Study Guide. Look at verse 8 in your Grow, Pray, and Study Guide. In this version, it says, Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times. In this reading, Zacchaeus is a hidden saint. In this reading, Zacchaeus has already developed a relationship with Jesus. In this reading, Zacchaeus has already recognized that some of the things that he was doing were wrong, and he would, in Jesus, in his relationship with Jesus Christ, he decided, I'm going to give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times. Not I will, but I am already doing that. That's something I'm already doing. So in this situation, Zacchaeus was not a sinner, but a convert. Zacchaeus was a saint that surprised everybody. Zacchaeus was someone who already had a relationship with Jesus. When the crowd grumbles, he defends himself. The crowd had demonized him, but in this version, he is a saint. And in both versions, Jesus calls him a son of Abraham. A son of Abraham. Zacchaeus, in whatever version you read, whether it be the New Revised Standard or some of the versions that say that he will do this, Zacchaeus changed his life because Jesus called him by name. So the question for us is this. When Jesus calls our name, and Jesus invites himself into our lives and into our hearts and into our homes, how will we respond? In this situation, Zacchaeus responded dramatically. How do you respond to God's grace? How do you respond to God's mercy in your life? How will you respond to God's grace and mercy? That's the question for all of us today. Amen.